The recorder came out of the rubble with its casing scorched but its core intact, which is more than I can say for most of what I catalog. I logged it the way I log everything for the ledger: location, structural condition, estimated age of the wreck, species of occupant, and set it in the query rack to run overnight while I processed the rest of Aldermore Relay's remains. I did not expect to still be sitting there when the sun came back up over the crater line. I am an archivist for the Syndral Concord. My work is aftermath. When a campaign ends, someone has to walk the ground the fleet has already left and write down what happened there, so the doctrine committees have something to revise their doctrine against. Most sites give me casualty counts and structural failure reports. Occasionally a site gives me something that changes how I understand my own species. Aldermore gave me that. The relay had been a human evacuation point. Civilians routed through it toward the transports during the siege of Tesson's Reach, back when our fleet still held that system. It fell the way these places fall. Slow, then all at once, then silence. By the time our ground teams reached it, there was nothing left to secure. Just the crater, the collapsed dome, and a duty recorder that had somehow kept running through all of it, because the woman operating the relay's makeshift infirmary never turned it off. Her name, according to the log header, was Mirelle Coe, Civilian Relief Coordinator, unranked, no military designation of any kind. I want to be precise about that, because precision is the whole of my job. She was not a soldier. She had no reason to be at Aldermore at all, except that the evacuation manifest listed her as staff, and staff do not leave until the last transport does. The early entries are what you would expect. Wounded brought in from the perimeter. Names, injuries, triage priority, spoken flat and fast into the recorder between procedures, the voice of someone narrating her own hands, so the next shift would know what she'd already tried. I have heard hundreds of these. They read like inventory. I began speeding through them the way I speed through most of my sources, listening for the load-bearing sentence and discarding the rest. Then, 41 hours into the siege by the recorder's own timestamp, the entries changed shape. Bringing in 3 more, 2 hours, 1 knot. A pause, the sound of equipment being dragged. He's Syndral, left behind when the position broke. I don't know if that's standard for them, or if his own people just ran out of time. Doesn't matter. He's bleeding the same as anyone. I stopped the playback and checked the timestamp against our own fleet records. It matched a retreat order I had cataloged at a different site 3 weeks earlier. A company-level withdrawal from the forward trench line. Casualties left in place per standing doctrine. Because a wounded soldier who cannot self-extract is, in Concord terms, already a loss you do not compound by risking 2 more. I want to be honest about what I felt hearing that. Not alarm, not yet. I assumed it was an anomaly. 1 soldier, 1 caregiver, 1 moment of battlefield sentiment that would resolve itself into something ordinary before the recorder ran out. It did not resolve, it repeated. I should explain what an anomaly usually looks like in my line of work, because it will make clear why I kept listening instead of filing a preliminary summary and moving to the next site. An anomaly is a single data point that contradicts the pattern and then vanishes. A soldier who hesitates once and is killed for it. A civilian who shows 1 act of aberrant behavior under duress and is never heard from again. The wreckage is full of anomalies. They are noise. What is not noise is a pattern that survives repeated, independent tests under worsening conditions. Because worsening conditions are precisely what strips a species down to what it actually is, rather than what it claims to be. I had a decision to make, sitting in that crater log. Coe's first entry as noise and move on, or keep the recorder running, and see whether exhaustion, fear, and diminishing supplies changed her arithmetic. They did not. Over the following days, and I use days loosely, because the recorder shows Coe sleeping in increments of under 2 hours for most of the siege, 4 more Syndral casualties came through the relay's doors. Each time the same procedure. Each time the same voice, tired past the point where I would expect tone to survive, running through triage with no audible difference between the entries for her own evacuees and the entries for ours. She did not ask them questions before treating them. She did not flag them for later disposal once stabilized. In one entry she is heard arguing with another human relief worker who wanted the Syndral casualties moved outside the shelter to conserve supplies for our own. Her answer, verbatim, because I have replayed it enough times now that I do not need the transcript in front of me. They stop being theirs the second they're on my table. Get the saline. I have reviewed thousands of hours of enemy record across 4 campaigns. I have heard humans express hatred, fear, grief, contempt. The full range, unremarkable, the same as any species defends itself. I had never heard this, not compassion in the abstract, which every species claims for itself in its own propaganda. Something narrower and, I have come to believe, considerably more dangerous, an inability, under sustained lethal pressure, to sort the wounded by side. The relay fell on the 8th day. By then, the infirmary was down to a single working light panel and a triage board that Co had stopped updating with priority codes because, her words, entry 60-something, I have lost exact count. Priorities the same for everybody now, which is alive. 2 more syndrome casualties had come through by that point, brought in not by their own retreating units, but by human civilians who had found them in the wreckage of the perimeter and carried them in on stretchers made from stripped bulkhead panels. Because that is apparently what you do when the person running your infirmary has made it clear, without ever giving a speech about it, that everyone gets carried. I do not think Co ordered this. I think it happened because 30 other frightened people watched her do it first, for 8 days, and decided that was simply how the relay worked now. The last entries are the ones I have listened to most, though they are the hardest to sit with. The evacuation transport arrived late and under fire. Co had time to move either the last of the human civilians or the 2 syndrome casualties still under her care, not both, and the manifest protocol was explicit about which one she was authorized to choose. The recording captures her making the other choice, carrying one of our soldiers to the transport herself, on a body that the injury log shows was already failing from exhaustion and blood loss of her own, because she'd been donating plasma to her patients for 6 days straight without reporting it. The last entry is 19 seconds long. It is not addressed to anyone. I believe she assumed, correctly, that no one would ever hear it but whoever eventually cataloged the wreck. If anyone finds this, the 2 syndrome in Bay 3, their names are on the wristbands. I couldn't find translations, so I wrote down what they told me themselves. Somebody should know what to call them. That's all. That's the job. Then the recorder keeps running, alone, for 6 more hours, until the dome comes down. I have submitted my report to the Doctrine Committee, with a recommendation I did not expect to be making when I opened this file. Our withdrawal protocol assumes an enemy that will treat abandoned wounded as we would, as a liability to be neutralized, ignored, or exploited, depending on the enemy's temperament. Aldermore demonstrates that this assumption fails against humans, and fails in a specific, exploitable way that has nothing to do with mercy as we understand it. Co did not spare our soldiers out of weakness, hesitation, or a failure to recognize them as the enemy. She recognized them perfectly. She simply did not consider recognition sufficient grounds to let a body go untreated. That is the finding I am required to log, and I will log it in those words. But I want it noted separately, outside the formal record, that I do not think the committee will read it as a threat assessment. I think, if they are honest, they will read it the way I did at hour 41, alone with a dead woman's voice in an empty crater, as a description of a species that will come for their own dead, and yours, with the same hands, on the same night, and never once ask which is which. The wristbands, translated, are logged in the appendix. Both names are syndrome, both are spelled correctly.